Hey guys, what's up? So today I'm looking at two different guitars with two different pickups, so stay tuned. So what exactly am I looking at here? Well, in this Gibson Les Paul Studio, I have the OG Seymour Duncan JB pickup. And in this LTD 256, I have the Seymour Duncan Alternative 8. Now you might be looking at these guitars and saying, they're just too different to really be comparable. But they're really not that different. They both have the same scale length, they're both made out of the same wood. Granted, this one has a maple cap and this one is mahogany. This one is chambered, this one isn't. But where it really matters, I don't think they're that apples to oranges. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't real differences between these two guitars and how they're built. In this guitar, we have the stock alpha pots that came with the guitar, and in this guitar, I have some Mojo Tone potentiometers and oil caps. I'm not going to be using the tone control, so I don't think the capacitors are really going to have that much of an influence in this test. Now, the one thing that is different about these two guitars that I think will influence the tone overall is the distance of the pole pieces from the bridge. Now in the Gibson, we're looking at about 32 to 33 millimeters between, that sixth saddle and that first pole piece. Whereas on this guitar, we're looking at more like 40 millimeters. And what that should do is make this guitar a little bit darker. But for this test, what I'm really curious about is whether or not that Alnico 8 magnet really is going to alter that low-mid range characteristic of the pickup, or even just a more fuller kind of textural tone, even on the clean stuff. I tend to find that when a pickup sounds hotter, what I'm really hearing is kind of a saturation in the frequencies in between the peaks. And what I mean by that is, yeah, you have your resonant peak frequencies, but on some of these much more high output pickups, I hear every other frequency kind of get boosted up. With that said, both pickups, when measured, are within the high 16 kilo ohm resistance range. But we can throw charts, graphs, numbers around all day, and those do matter, but I think when it comes down to it, how does it actually sound and what are the differences? So keep in mind that given the spacing between the two bridges and the pickups, this guitar should have a snappier, brighter sound, and this guitar should be slightly darker. But we'll see if the Alnico 8 has any real influence in the overall tone. Okay, so let's start with the JB and the Gibson. I'm running everything into my EVH Stealth. We're on the green channel. I have it mic'd up with an SM57 on this Mesa oversized cab. I also have a directional condenser mic pointed at the cab over yonder, and we're going to get some room mic audio later on. But for now, we'll just do a back and forth on the clean channel with the JB and the Alternative 8, and then we'll move on to the high gain stuff. Alright, so those were the clean tones. Now we're going to wade into something with a little bit more gain. Actually, a lot bit more gain. I'm going to use the blue channel on the EVH, boosted with a Boss SD1, because that's still one of the best overdrive pedals you can put in front of this amp. And so let's hear what that sounds like. All right, so listening back to the clips through the speakers and my monitors and through the headphones, pretty similar. I think that's to be expected when it comes to like the high gain stuff. Once you start to add in all that that distortion, that saturation, all that harmonic content, it really does just kind of even the proverbial playing field of tone. But with the clean tones, I don't know if I would give all the credit to the magnets that are being used in the pickups. The one thing that I think is a little bit more obvious is the mid-range on the Alnico 8 is just a more full spectrum, sound across the board. And that's true of the low mid-range, but also some of the high mid-range is a little bit less like pronounced on that very high top end. The Gibson is obviously a little bit brighter, and I think that has to do with the fact that that pickup is closer to the bridge. You'd say a darker tone for the Alnico 8, but I didn't really think that it had any kind of muffled sound in the low end. What I really heard was more of like just a full kind of body, coming out of that pickup, when you listen back to it. And I think the difference in position of the pickups on the Gibson, you're just getting more of that top end kind of brightness, a little bit more snappiness. With the Alnico 8, I think if you were going to point anything out, there is just a bit more girth, I guess, to like that overall sound, and it's not just the low end; it kind of carries through the entire mid-range too. So take that for what you will. Let's go ahead and listen to that directional condenser mic that I have pointed at the speaker here, a little bit further back, and then we'll see if in the room there's any pronounced difference. Okay, so listening to the room mic, a little bit more pronounced differences than what I was hearing coming out of the SM57, and I think part of that has to do with the fact that you're hearing some of the string noise coming through that mic, and the Gibson's a little bit janglier, and especially when you're listening to those clean tones, it just has a little bit more snap. So take that for what you will. Maybe that translates into the pickups. Maybe. One thing that was definitely noticeable is on the Alnick 08 pickup, regardless of darkness, brightness, whatever, the Gibson still is a brighter guitar, and that was pretty apparent in the high gain stuff. Just a little bit more of that fizzy top end. But the Alnick 08 pickup coming through here, everything, it just had a little bit more of that like ballsy, just everything tone. Just, you know, there was a fullness, and it wasn't just because it had more low end, it was because it just seemed to fill out the entire spectrum of tone. And I could hear that in the room when I was playing, and I could definitely feel it, you know, as I'm playing, because I don't have that bright top end bite that I'm hearing in the room. I'm definitely feeling more of that low end, but I'm just feeling more of the overall sound coming through. And I think the guitars have something to do with the sound difference, especially on the top end. But I do think that Alnick 08 Magnet, for what it's worth, is going to give you a little bit more, you know, just push and saturation, you know, in your signal before it hits your amp. So that's my 2 cents. If you heard something different, or if you have other opinions, or if you really think, you know, the apples to oranges is apparent here because of the position of those pickups, you know, let me know in the comments. I'm always curious to hear what you guys hear, what I don't hear, and what you guys think. So anyway, I'll see you guys later.